First of all, Shalom Aleichem, Baruchim Habayim. Well, I just wanted to say that we thank Tziona for hosting us once again. She also prepared all the food. Let us begin with judicial reform. A hot topic. First of all, let us mention the straightforward and incontrovertible fact that the situation that exists in Israel today and has existed for many years is unique. In other words, such a system does not exist anywhere else on the planet. A system whereby the judges on the Supreme Court have a veto power over who can be nominated as a judge by elected representatives of the public, of the citizens. The way the committee is set up, we won't go into all the details, we'll just mention that there are X number of judges and there are X number of attorneys who represent the guild or professional association of the lawyers in this country, in Hebrew Lishkat Orchei Hadin. Lishkat Orchei Hadin, in other words, how many lawyers are there in Israel? I don't know exactly, let's say 100,000, I think, something like that. And that is some very small percentage of the population, obviously, correct? Mm-hmm. They have, if I'm not mistaken, 2 representatives on this committee out of 9, I think it is.
It's 2.
2 out of 9. In other words, for some reason, lawyers, just by virtue of the fact that they represent this guild of lawyers, which is a professional organization looking out for its own interests, they have a huge representation despite their tiny percentage in terms of how many lawyers there are in the country, whereas the general citizenry of the country have relatively very few compared to them. You add to that the 3 judges, and you have and you'll add to that on top of that you take into account the fact that somehow miraculously, although the law specifically addresses this and says that it cannot be so, but somehow miraculously all the 3 judges and those 2 representatives of the lawyers they always agree about who should and who should not be a judge. They're always unanimous, which is very interesting. It's almost as if they discussed it ahead of time. You might suspect, if you were not so convinced of their absolute forthrightness, straightforwardness, honesty, and sincerity. So perish such a thought, but it almost looks that way. Such a situation does not exist anywhere in the world. Let us take, for example, the United States. The United States is generally considered to be a democratic country. Who nominates judges to the Supreme Court of the United States? The President. Who is the President? The politician. He's a public representative of an elected official, voted into power according to the American Constitution, according to the Electoral College, etc., etc. He is voted into power as President of the United States by the citizens of the United States, and it is his sole prerogative to nominate someone to be confirmed by the Senate as a Supreme Court judge. Now, it goes without saying that a left-leaning president will nominate left-leaning judges. He doesn't just pick names out of a hat. He has people working under him, and he asks them, see who all the judges are, the likely candidates on the various benches in the United States who might qualify. What do you know about them? What do you hear about them? Are they good? Are they not good? People have a positive opinion of them, negative opinion of them? And also, what are their outlooks? What are their philosophies? What are their let us state the word openly, their political positions? Are they left-wing, so-called liberal, which is not the same thing, by the way? Radical left-wing wokeism is not the same as liberal. Or are they conservative? right wing, whatever you want to call it. So it goes without saying that this president, who happens to be leftist, no, I don't mean this one right now, I mean any given president who happens to be a leftist, more left-leaning, is going to nominate judges of a certain ideological ilk, and the same is true of a right-leaning president. But he doesn't have, it's not only up to him. These individuals who have been nominated by the president have to also undergo quite a rigorous investigation by the Senate, and they can be interviewed and they can be asked all kinds of difficult questions, and they vet them very thoroughly, and they can, if they want to, reject someone nominated by the president. They can say, we don't think he's a good choice, in which case the president has to come up with somebody else. And that's happened. Reagan wanted to nominate a certain excellent judge, but the Congress at that time managed to stymie it. Bork, yes, exactly. I remember. Simply because he believed that one should take the Constitution at its word, as it's written. At any rate, no one has ever suggested that because elected public officials, in other words politicians, namely the president, namely senators, because they are politicians, they should have nothing to do with nominating judges. No one's ever heard such a thing in the United States, at least. And the same is essentially true all over the world. For some reason, we have people here in this country who would like to pretend that the nomination of judges has nothing to do with ideologies and politics, and therefore politicians should have nothing to do with it, or at least they should have as little to do with it as possible. This is disingenuous. This is simply a lie. Because even if you take a country again like the United States, which has a constitution, which we here do not, unfortunately, there are also good reasons. I mean, one can explain why we don't, but the fact is we don't. Even in a country like the US that has a constitution, which on many issues is very clear what is correct, what is incorrect, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, there's obviously still a lot of room for interpretation by those judges how to view a certain law or a certain suggestion or what have you in terms of that constitution. And we know that a left-leaning judge will often differ in his interpretation and his opinion compared to a right-leaning judge. No surprises there. That's how human beings are. You can't separate the person's ideology, outlook on life, and his whole system value, his whole value system. Oh, sorry. You cannot separate that from the person. So the claims of the Israeli left right now that this is an assault on democracy, and Israel is about to be transformed from a democratic country, which is not true, it's not, or barely, much less than most democratic countries, is going to be transformed from a democratic country into some kind of authoritarian regime. This is entirely disingenuous. There's no basis for it in reality whatsoever. Not only are the suggested reforms not extreme, and not only are they not designed to achieve such an end, they are in fact probably too mild, probably too much was already given away before the discussions even began. Too much compromise, probably. That's what I think. Certainly not the other way around. So why is the Israeli left, headed by people, His Holiness Justice Aharon Barak, why are these people so up in arms? Because they know very well that for 30 odd years, actually began before that, but let's say for 30 odd years, from 1995 Leminyanam, they have been able to stymie any right-wing government, block anything that they chose to block, against the will of the electorate, against the will of the government. Basically, they were able to run the country more or less as they saw fit, because no matter what the outcome of an election might be, no matter what the political constellation might be in the Knesset, etc., they would have the final word. They knew this. Not only they knew it, the New Israel Fund knew this and knows this, as do many other such organizations, which is why they openly admitted 6 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago that they have been funding the left-wing demonstrations against these reforms. They know very well what's at stake. They know that till now, if they just kept funding all these different organizations, they could ensure that whatever they didn't like would be stymied by the Supreme Court. And now they understand this may come to an end. I'm not sure that it will yet, by the way, but it may come to an end. It may be some time, it may be a process, but they understand that there's a serious possibility that this veto, this power that they have to block anything that they truly do not like, whereas to shoo through the gate anything that they do approve of, no matter whether it's legal or not, they understand that this may well come to an end. So they cannot take it sitting down. From their point of view, this is life and death. Because they also know, by the way, they're very unlikely to win any election in the foreseeable future. In this last election, Meretz was wiped off the political map. In the next election, it's quite possible the Labour Party will be wiped off the map, which will be an interesting development, historical development. The party, the socialist, communist, authoritarian, anti-democratic Mapai party that ran this country like a mafia for decades, which now has, 6 or 5 representatives in the Knesset, maybe disappear altogether, which will be quite an historical turnaround. So they know their only hope to continue destroying this country and destroying the Jewish people, that is to say, ensuring that they remain as non-Jewish as possible, is through this judicial system, mainly the Supreme Court, which has a lot to do also with other judges on lower courts, but essentially we're talking about that. And there are other aspects to this reform as well, but we won't go into all those details. Recently, His Holiness Aharon Barak deigned to be interviewed by a journalist, of course someone who's entirely on his side, by the name of Roni Koban. You can, and I in fact recommend that you listen to this interview. It's an hour long, roughly. It's very enlightening. This interview took place less than 2 weeks ago. I listened to it last week, and His Holiness Aharon Barak explains, states quite plainly a number of interesting things. For example, when asked, which is something that bothers many people in the country, why are there essentially no Sfaradi judges on the Supreme Court, and usually no Dati judges on the Supreme Court, he very almost tearily explained that we really tried to find the right kind of high caliber Sfaradi and Dati judges. We just couldn't find them. We're really sorry. It's unfortunate. They just don't exist apparently. Such judges don't exist. But of course this is a lie. And how do we know it's a lie? It's very simple. Take for example a judge who was on the Supreme Court for many years, no longer. His name is Meni Mazuz, 100% Sfaradi. Tunisian, there you go. So I think 6th or 5th or something generation Yerushalmi, okay? Absolutely Sfaradi. So why was he kosher? Why was he okay? Because he was Betsalmam uvidmutam. He was exactly as they would want someone to be. They don't really care about your DNA, whether your grandfather came from Tunisia or from Hungary. That's not important. What's important is that you think like they think, that you have the same correct opinions. If your opinions are the authorized opinions, judged by His Holiness Aharon Barak to be progressive, democratic, etc., then that's fine. If the fact that you're Sephardi is not going to be a problem. In fact, it's to their benefit. Then they can say, look, we have a Sephardi judge, or we have this Dati guy with a kippah. So what's the problem? But the fact is, there are not that many Sephardi judges who really fit that bill. And therefore, Nebuch, they found it terribly difficult to find the Sephardi judges who would fit the bill, or Dati judges who would fit the bill, because generally they don't think exactly along those lines. When they do find such a person, they grab him. Decades ago, there was a religious judge, Professor Menachem Elon, who was actually very knowledgeable in Torah, but as another professor said to me once about such people, he was a meshumad. Meshumad in the sense that he kept Shabbat, he kept kasher, he went to shul every day. That wasn't the problem. But in terms of his ideologies, his value system, he was a goy. No question about it. He thought like Aharon Barak, so they can get on just fine. No problem. So the fact that you have a kippah is not at all a disadvantage. It's, in fact, it's desirable. It helps to create the impression that, yeah, we really love such judges, no question about it. But the fact is that out of, 77 or something judges in the Supreme Court over the last 7 decades or something like that, a tiny number have been either Sephardi or Dati. So this is how he explained it. He's a liar. He also lied about the number, by the way, because he claimed in his interview that the number of Sephardi judges was 15 out of 77 or something, but in fact it was checked by people. It's not true. I don't remember the exact figure. It's less. It's 7 or 8 or 9 or something, but it's not 15. But you shouldn't be shocked by the fact that he plays fast and loose with the facts. But there you go. That's the reality. But more than that, he was asked by this interviewer, who's not a bad interviewer, it should be said. He was asked by him, you are the one, Your Holiness, Aharon Barak, you invented the term, the concept, the expression that Israel is a Medina Yehudit v'demokratit, a Jewish and democratic state. If you look in Megillat HaAtzmaut, Israel's Declaration of Independence, you will most certainly find the words Medina Yehudit right there at the very beginning. The word demokrati doesn't appear there at all, just by the way. But Aharon Barak decided that this is a Medina Yehudit Demokrati. It has to be both. All right, so the interviewer asked him, so tell me, Your Holiness, and he's a great fan of this guy. It should be clear. He really gave him the kid glove treatment. He didn't ask him any tough questions, not really. He asked him, so are you more on the democratic side or the Jewish side in that formulation? And he said quite openly, he said, I'm more on the democratic side. And he explained why, in his own words. He said, because I know very little about the Jewish sources. Those were his words. It's right there. It's in Hebrew, but you can hear it for yourself. Mm-hmm. So the guy asked him, do you know a lot about Mishpat HaIvri, in other words, Jewish law? He said, no, I know very little. Menachem Elon, by the way, the one I mentioned before, was an expert in Mishpat Ivri, but of course they managed to ensure that he could never get a word in edgeways to tilt anything in a given direction. But he said, no, I know very little about Mishpat Ivri. And what about Gemara? Do you know anything about Gemara? He says, no, I know very little about Gemara. The man openly admits that he has nothing to do with Jewish civilization, Jewish culture, Jewish religion, Jewish belief, Jewish mores, Jewish practices over millennia. He openly admits this, but he is the right person to lead the Jewish people and create a Jewish and democratic state. And this is precisely the point. People like His Holiness Aharon Barak, they know that they know the truth. They have the truth. They're enlightened, progressive, far-seeing people, and they know what's right and what's wrong, what's proper and what's not proper, and it's their job to teach us. That's how they view all of us. We are just the proletariat. We're just the commoners to be educated and to be told what's correct and what's not correct. And I understand Aharon Barak very well. I want you to understand. I agree with him 100%. If you believe that you have the truth and these are the proper values and ideas, and this is the correct ideology and philosophy, and anything else is wrong, and not just wrong, but extremely misguided and deleterious and pernicious, and must be stamped out at any cost. If that's what you believe, and he obviously does, and all his cronies believe the same thing, and they ensure that the court is packed with precisely such people, then of course it's your duty to act in such a way, and to turn the Supreme Court into your own personal fiefdom. Obviously that's the case. I understand him 100%, and he's entirely correct. If I was in his position, I would do exactly the same thing. And that's exactly why we find in Rambam, in Ilchot Sanhedrin, Perek Sheni, if you ask yourself, how are judges appointed? How are shofetim, how are dayanim appointed according to the Torah? What does it say here? Perek Sheni, Halacha Het. Amru Hachamim, Shemi Beth Din HaGadol, Hayu Sholachim B'chol Eretz Yisrael Vodakim. From the Beit Din HaGadol, which is the first court, the Supreme Court, the Beit Din HaGadol in Yerushalayim is established first. And they, not politicians, they, the judges, the Chachamim, the people who understand what the Jewish people are all about, they send out people to investigate throughout the country, because you have to appoint local courts, local judges in each town, in each locality, in each province. They send out people to check. Kol mishet masa'uhu hacham. When they investigate and they find the right kind of person who is hacham, he is very knowledgeable. U'yirehet, and he is God-fearing. He flees from sin. U'ano, and he is modest, humble. U'shafui, which means balanced and of sound mind. Ufirko na'eh, and his reputation is squeaky clean. V'ruach habariyot noha himeno, and people have a positive attitude towards him. Osim otho dayan be'iro, such a person is then nominated a dayan in his town, in his place, and he begins at a lower level of a lower court, and eventually he'll probably be promoted up through the system if he's worthy. So who, according to the Rambam, according to the Chachamim, who is in charge of appointing judges? Politicians? No. When Aharon Barak and his cronies say politicians shouldn't be involved in this process, they have a point, because I think the same thing. we should all think the same thing. Chachamim understand who Chachamim are. How are you going to ask the average Joe on the street, the average Yossi or Meir or Shimon, how are you going to ask him? How is he going to tell you who's the right person to be a judge, to be a leader, because he's a Chacham? How do you know he's a Chacham? You sell vegetables in the shuk, which is a fine thing to do, but you know nothing about who's a Chacham. Even if you're a professor of medicine, you still know nothing about who should be a Chacham. What is a Chacham? What kind of person? What caliber of person? What type of individual we're looking for? It's nothing to do with you. So they have a very good point. I agree. That's exactly how the system should work. It's just it should work in this way, based on the Torah, not based on the foreign ideologies and notions of the radical left, who want this country to be anything but a Jewish state. So that's what it's all about. The real discussion is, should it be the people who believe in radical left ideologies, progressives, woke people, all these kinds of people with all their agendas, whether they should decide who are the right people to fill these positions and therefore really set the tone of the country in many ways, or should it be people who represent and really are steeped in the Torah and have spent their lives understanding and studying the Torah and really can represent what the Jewish people are all about. That's the debate. And that's why we, of course, don't agree with people like His Holiness, and we never will. And all the rest is just chatter. It's not the real thing. It's not the real deal. This is what it's all about. Chachamim agree with Aharon Barak. It's Chachamim who choose Chachamim. Just like Aharon Barak thinks it's judges who should choose judges. He's 100% correct. What he's suggesting is fine for the Dutch, for the people in New Zealand, for the Norwegians, I don't know, for people in Timbuktu, but not for us. Yes?
But who gets to decide the Chachamim that actually represent the Torah?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question. We have in this Perek in Rambam, we won't go into the details now for lack of time, but we have 7 things mentioned in the Torah, right? Talks about Chachamim u'Nevonim. They have to be Chachamim, Yirat Shamayim, Anawa, humility, Sinath Mamon. They have to hate money. That's a difficult thing. Once Rav Maimon was asked in the 50s when he wanted to establish he raised the idea, the possibility of establishing a Sanhedrin. Of course, nothing came of it, but a great Rav he spoke to once asked him, tell me, how are we going to find people who hate money? He said, for money you can get anything. It sounds better in Yiddish, but that's how it was expressed. If you pay enough, you can get anything you like. So, yes, it's not an easy thing to find such people, but such people do exist. Now, if you have a proper leadership, shall we say, have a real Jewish government headed by a real Jewish king, well, he will be able to set in motion a system that will uncover these people, and even if they don't want to become the heads of the Sanhedrin, he'll force them to become. And that's one of the conditions, by the way, for being a dayan, as Rambam mentions over here, I believe. I won't go into it now, but just it's well known in the Talmud. Rambam brings it here that how do you know the person is the right person for the job? Because he doesn't want it. He refuses. He says, not me, I'm not good enough, I'm not pious enough, I'm not humble enough, I don't know enough. Those people ask, go and find someone else, don't you leave me alone. That's exactly the kind of guy you want. Okay? And such people may be few and far between, but they exist. They always do exist because they have to. Because that's how Hashem runs the world. So, yes, you have a good question, David. You have to first have a Bet Din Gadol set up, which consists of the right people. But then it's not even the Melech's decision. It's no longer it's in the king's hands. It's now in the hands of the Chachamim, whom to nominate as Dayanim, as Shofatim, etc. Yeah.
So first we need to have a proper king, right? Because Moshe Rabbeinu was the one who picked the 71 judges in the Sunnah.
Well, that would be nice, but even if, let's say for whatever reason, we don't have a full-blown monarchy, without going into all the details what that might mean and all the various possible variations of a monarchy that we might consider, you have to have a government headed by people, and specifically by one person who's at the head of the top of the pyramid, who knows what he's about and wants to do the right thing, and knows what Am Yisrael needs and wants to do that thing for the right reasons. It all depends on that in the long run, right? When you have a president in the United States who wants the southern border to be sealed, you can seal it. When you want a president who, for whatever reason, doesn't want it to be sealed, well, somehow, rather miraculously, it's just not. And, it's just porous, and everyone can just cross over and do as they please. It all depends, it all comes down to the true will of the persons at the people at the top, at the very top. I did want to quote from this textbook that I have here, which is called, this is an American textbook, Elements of Democratic Government, it's called. Printed in 1958 for the first time, Le Mignonhomme. And it's at the beginning of the book it talks about basic assumptions of democracy. And it says in this textbook as follows. I'll read a few lines. If all other values are subordinate to the claims of individual personality, in other words, a person says, this is what I like, this is what I believe, and that's what counts, then it is the superior value, the highest of the democratic ideals. But why should it be the ultimate? Should not our highest aim be to do the will of God, or to serve truth and goodness? The ideals of democratic government, that is, government controlled by the people for their purposes, must be widely accepted and believed by the people, or those ideals cannot, by definition, be democratic. Respect for individual personality and individual opinions is the maximum on which it has been possible to get widespread agreement. On the next page, on page 29, it goes on to say that the highest value, the ultimate for politics, is the liberation of and respect for individual personality. Okay. If you believe in democracy, and I wish to make it entirely clear that I do not, but if you believe in such a thing, then I can't see how a Torah Jew could believe in such a thing. But if you do believe in such a thing, or those who do, this is very logical, very reasonable. And that's precisely why it should be the case that the judicial branch does not involve itself in all kinds of decisions which have to do with religion or ideologies or philosophies of life and what have you. It have a relatively limited role based on the explicit provisions of the law. But when you have a judicial system that decides to be what's called activist, which means essentially to subvert the democratic process and decide over the heads of the people who do not agree about what ideology or what religion or what philosophy is the ultimate. In other words, if you say, for example, the ultimate is to do the will of God, okay, that's very, very nice, very noble. Who defines what is the will of God? It's a reasonable question, correct? Even if you choose a different formula, nothing to do with God, you say, we believe in social justice. All right, what does that mean? Social justice. Who decides what is just for which groups of society? That's what social means. Society, parts of society. Who decides what the priorities are, what the essential values on which such decisions are based should be? Seeing that there is no possibility in a open, free, supposedly free, democratic society in which you have what is called in the Gentile world the separation of church and state, precisely because people don't agree about religion, so therefore you have to have a separation of church and state, because we can't agree. This one's Protestant, he's Catholic, he thinks this, he thinks that. Whatever it is, they have differences on many things, so we can't agree on that. So the only way to live together is to say there's no connection between church and state. Religion is an entirely personal affair. You worship or don't worship, it's as you wish, to whom you wish, when you wish, it's your business. And the state has nothing to say about that. That's a perfectly reasonable democratic position, if that's how you define democracy and that's what you believe in. All right. But precisely for that reason, in such a case, the court cannot simply decide that I, Judge so-and-so, or all of us together, all these judges happen to be of a certain opinion, religious, ideological, political, economic persuasion. Some people believe more in what's called a social democratic type of approach to economic policy. Others believe in a more capitalist, conservative approach. then for that reason, these things should have nothing to do with the law and therefore nothing to do with judges. These are political questions, of course they are. And that's exactly why when the Iron Lady, Margaret Thatcher, came to power in 1979, the Mignonum, she inherited one of the greatest messes and disasters one could imagine. England was on its last legs when she became Prime Minister, and she saved England completely. She turned the UK around completely, from a basket case to a major economy and a serious country. Of course, now this is again rapidly dissipating, but what she managed to do was quite amazing. She managed to do it because she was an Iron Lady, because she knew what was right, or she thought she had an opinion, and she stuck to it. So when in 1981, Le Mignonum, in the Times of London newspaper, which is of course the forerunner of the Times of the New York Times, right? It's the most venerable newspaper almost on the planet. When in the Times of London in 1981, when she presented her budget, 364 economists, no less, 364 economists wrote to the Times explaining why her economic policies were such a bad idea, would be disastrous for the UK, and would lead to tremendous unemployment and recession and depression, you name it. She, of course, as she was wont, she ignored them, and she said, I know that you're wrong and I'm right, and at least I'm the one who has to make the decision. This is my decision, this is what we're going to do. It just so happens that, of course, within 2 or 3 years she was proved completely right. The economy was completely turned around by her policies. But so what were these economists, what were they talking about? They weren't expressing an economic point of view. They were expressing a political point of view. They didn't agree with her philosophy, her political outlook. That's okay, you don't have to agree with her. But the fact that you have a doctorate in economics and you don't agree with these policies doesn't mean that you're right. It just means that you have a different opinion. So that's fine. If you don't like her, don't vote for her. If you want to get rid of her, set up a party and run for election. Okay, whatever it is. Halavai, we would have leaders as resolute and determined and sure of themselves here as was Margaret Thatcher. Had any other country, had any other government been in charge when Argentina invaded, or from their perspective, to be fair, reoccupied the Falkland Islands, which they called Las Malvinas, and they're convinced belongs to them and not to the British, and I am not expressing an opinion. It really doesn't matter to me. When the Argentinians invaded the Falkland Islands, had any other government been in charge, they would not have responded. They would have negotiated, they would have done this, they would have some mealy-mouthed response. She decided that you invaded British sovereign territory, we're going to war. All her military chiefs said to her, we can't possibly go to war. It's the wrong season, it's in the South Atlantic, it's terribly rough seas, we can't do it. She said, either you give me a program, a blueprint for the invasion and recapture of the Falkland Islands in 48 hours by 8 a.m. on my table, or you resign. And guess what? They had a plan, they had a blueprint, they had a plan, and guess what? It worked. So you have to know what you want, and you have to stick to your guns. I hope the same is true of the people hopefully leading this attempt to change certain things in Israel today. That's with regards to democracy and courts and what have you. It should be pointed out that nowadays, throughout the world, not just in Israel, there is really no such thing as democracy anymore. Democracy is based on the idea or a liberal democracy is based on the idea that people have different opinions, and that's legitimate. And therefore, because we don't agree, we have to go by the majority. So we have a vote. Whoever gets the most votes is in power, and they pursue their policies until they're out of power. That's how it has always been in many countries for many, many generations. But that's no longer the case. Nowadays, there is really no politics. It's all religion. Everything is religion now. Gender ideologies are not a matter of politics. It's a matter of religion. All discussions to do with racism or slavery or all sorts of things that are constantly dredged up and discussed. It's not really about politics. It's about these new secular religions. Because as a wise man once said, I should remember the name of this person, but I think I don't. A well-known individual. He said that once you no longer believe in God, in Hashem, people who don't believe in God do not believe in nothing. They will believe in anything. So you believe in gender identity, the new secular religion of gender identity, or you believe in, or you believe in the soon to be upon us climate crisis, or what have you. These are all secular religions, and therefore you cannot disagree with these people, because if you do, you're a blasphemer. You're worse than a blasphemer. You are supporting ideologies that will destroy the world. So how can we countenance such a thing? But the Torah attitude, and even a non-Torah, just a common sense attitude, is that facts don't care about your feelings. And the world should not be run according to people's feelings. The world should be run according to facts, according to what is true and what is false, what is proper and what is improper, what is moral and what is immoral, what is correct and what is not correct. That's how the world should be run. But today it's all about, I feel this way, I feel that way, he feels, she feels, they feel. That such a world is a recipe for complete breakdown of human society, as we all see.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.